Hello everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar on business trends in the year of the rabbit. My name is Robert Law and I'm Director of Advisory and Insights at Asialink Business. I am joining you today from Sydney, from Gadigal lands, the lands of the Eora people, from Asialink Business's Sydney office. And I'm very pleased to be here. I want to extend my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you on, and indeed to others around the country who are joining us from other lands of Indigenous people. And I also want to extend my respects to Indigenous people who are joining and watching this webinar today. I'm very excited about getting to some of the great discussion that we are going to have today. I do just need to go through some quick housekeeping. So the first thing to note is that today's webinar will be recorded. The great news is that means it goes up on YouTube and you can watch it later at your leisure. We would love this to be interactive. We've got some great panelists joining us, so please do put questions in the Q&A box, and we'd love to be able to answer those and respond to them. Really, today is about looking ahead a little. We are about 2 weeks into the year of the rabbit, or I should note, the year of the cat from a Vietnamese perspective. And what we like to do at Asialink Business is really try and equip businesses with the insights that they need to navigate what is a complex, but also, quite attractive region to do business in. So we've pulled together some predictions or trends, insights, call them what you will, from a real diverse cross-section of people. We wanted to go out to diverse voices, and so we've got contributions from CEOs, from startup founders, and from sectoral experts. And we have distilled them in a discussion paper. I'll just share my screen now for those of you who haven't seen the discussion paper. It's live on our website. And you can see here some of the trends that we've touched on. Great contributions from Sanjeev Gandhi, the CEO of Orica, who talks about the challenge of managing in a energy transition environment. Naomi Vowles from Giveable, based in Singapore, has talked about the rising requirements for reporting around sustainability and how that's creating challenges and opportunities for businesses. Some contributions from Bronwyn around energy transition, which we'll talk about a bit later today. Alan Beechan from Toll Groups talked about some challenges in supply chain. Arjun Beeson, a good friend, who's also co-founder of a startup called Overwatch Data, talked a little bit about some of the challenges we're seeing in the EV space and some of the trade-offs that even early stage companies are needing to make. And it goes on, some interesting input from Sabrina around what's happening with AI in education. And of course, Tracy, who is with us today, talking a little bit about some of the really interesting things happening in emerging markets and what that means for investment and migration and talent. So really pleased to take you through some of these things shortly. Before I do that, I would just like to pass to the CEO of Asialink Business, Leigh Howard, for some introductory remarks. Over to you, Leigh.
Thanks, Rob, and hello everyone. It's great to have our speakers and our audience members all with us today. And it's quite wonderful to be having this discussion at the start of the year once again. I wanted to make just a few framing remarks about our business trend series. And so I was thinking last night about the increasing importance we all seem to place on being aware of trends in business, which is primarily so that we can get ahead of them rather than be disrupted by them. It reminded me of an occasion 20 years ago when I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with someone by the name of John Naisbitt in Hong Kong. For those who might be unfamiliar with the name John Naisbitt, he was a American author, a speaker, and futurist. He was the first person to coin the term megatrend, and he authored several books which captured those truly large-scale global changes that reshape and redirect our lives. Now, I'd never met anyone who called themselves a futurist or was called a futurist by others before. And so it was quite a surreal experience to be speaking with someone who, with relative accuracy, spent their entire life researching and predicting the future. Now, John had this really great saying, which was that trends are like horses. They're much easier to ride in the direction that they are going, which is why our Asialink Business Trends Initiative is all about identifying and then unpacking trends with practical relevance to Australian businesses, particularly those with an eye on Asia, so that businesses can anticipate and hopefully move forward in the same direction. I wouldn't have to tell many of our audience members today that Asia continues to be the fastest growing region in the world. The opportunities for business, the size of the prize, if you like, is only getting bigger and bigger. But so is the pace of change and the complexity across Asia. Our region is a truly dynamic environment for doing business. So one thing I would note heading into today's discussion is that it certainly feels like we are experiencing more trends than ever, and they're not going away anytime soon. So one of the challenges for business is knowing what trends are truly consequential. How do we separate short-term cycles from long-term trends and vice versa? And of course, importantly, once we observe them and we understand them, what do we actually do about them? So the background to all of this for the world at large, but particularly for Asia, is that there are some really big power shifts taking place in our region. Some of what are literally the most populous countries in the world and our nearest neighbours continue to industrialise and with it shift their societies and their economies forward. This is also having a compounding effect as the economic power of these large nations is increasingly being used for their own strategic ends. And they're not always in harmony with one another. So the trends captured in our Year of the Rabbit relating to energy transition, supply chains, digital transformation, human capital flows, and the rise of economic giants such as India truly epitomise what should be at the minds of business. So let me just conclude my welcome remarks by reminding our audience that many of us know about the large-scale opportunities across Asia. We know these markets offer the potential of significant benefits to ourselves, to our businesses, and to our country, but they're not without their challenges. So the question really for all of us is how are we ensuring that we have the capability to take full advantage of what's on offer? And I'd argue, again, that this is as relevant for individuals as it is for our nation at large. It's really essential that we have a national agenda to make sure we're capable enough to ride mega trends in the direction they are going, or to extend John Naisbitt's analogy, not get thrown off the horse. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists. It will be a very engaging discussion. So Rob, back to you.
Thanks very much, Leigh. I will introduce the panelists shortly, but just to note, we've already had a few questions coming in. So thanks very much to Chris for asking a couple of questions around China reopening, which is a very hot topic. And Leigh, I might come back to you a bit later in the session to pick up some of those questions around China. So we will come back and address that question. But now I would like to move to our panelists for today, and we're really excited to have three really great panelists with us. First up is Matthew Warrington, who is President of Toll Global Forwarding. and we'll go to you in a minute, Matthew. Also really excited to have Bronwyn with us. She's an energy transition expert and has held senior roles at AGL and Santos. And we also have Tracy Leigh, who has held roles, senior commercial roles across Australia and Asia, including with the IFC in Asia, and is a startup advisor and investor. So we'll go to all of them throughout the course of the session, but let's start with you, Matthew. It'd be great, firstly, if you could introduce yourself to the audience, but then I'd love to get you to talk a little bit about the trend that's actually been submitted by Alan Beecham, the Managing Director of Toll, in our discussion paper, where he talks about the challenges around managing logistics in an inflationary environment, and also some of the implications that has for sustainability. It'd be great to get you to unpack that. So over to you, Matthew.
Great, thanks, Rob. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. Yeah, so Matt Warrington, currently running the global forwarding business at Toll. I've been with Toll for about 2 years. Prior to that, a long career, 30 plus years in the industry, both running domestic and international supply chains around the world. So, but if I could just start, and I'm sure everyone will agree that the last few years we have seen unprecedented disruption in all supply chains and all markets around the world. The pandemic has brought the importance of supply chain to the forefront, which is great for the practitioners in the sector. So we've had lots of issues, major supply issues, port congestion, demand issues, excess or high demand, and we've worked through those challenges as an industry, which is great. So a lot of positive news that a lot of those challenges are largely now under control, and we've seen the freight rates reach record rates and then come back. So currently freight rates are now at pre-COVID levels. But we are now faced with a new set of challenges, like the war in Ukraine, other geopolitical instability, high interest rates, and really, rapidly declining global demand. So really, I guess the first key trend that we are seeing is there's still a lot of uncertainty in the supply chain sector. And it is really hard to predict the future. There's certainly different views on growth or how long the war in Ukraine will last, how China can respond to certain events. So what can companies do about that? So what we're doing at Toll, we're kind of working with our customers on building supply chain resilience. And I know this term has been widely used since the pandemic, but what does it really mean? Well, firstly, it's about adaptability. So with high levels of uncertainty, it's really important businesses have got multiple contingency plans that can rapidly adapt and pivot in the light of new developments. You can't predict what will happen, but certainly you can plan for it. And I think a really good example of this is how the wine industry responded to the export bans in China by finding new markets to sell in. Just another example, just this week I was talking to one of our retail customers who is looking to expand supply locations like Bangladesh as a diversification strategy so they can flex up and down in the event of further supply constraints from other regions. And I think Asia and Australian companies working in Asia are really well placed here. More specifically Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. We see that they'll have a greater role in global supply chains, and we've seen that with our own business. Just in the last 12 months, we've seen positive growth in Vietnam, Philippines, India, just as an example. But closely related to adaptability is agility, and that's how you respond. So, once you've identified, the need to adapt your supply chain, you need to do it really quickly. And the key enabler here is technology, and that's really the next key trend that we're seeing is the rise of supply chain technology. especially around supply chain visibility. And this has been a bit of the holy grail in supply chains for many years, but we think this year will be a pivotal year to unpack some of those challenges that Robert introduced and we've got in the paper. And we see that companies that truly digitise the end-to-end supply chain, and this has really been enabled by the convergence of technology, cloud, modern data platforms, automation, both physical and process automation, visibility, a stack of geolocational applications. AI is all about helping operators make sense of data to make better decisions. So it's the technology that we see will really help businesses respond quickly and adapt to the uncertain environment that we'll see throughout 2023. So the next key trend is we'll see organisation adjust their supply chain models. If we go back pre-COVID, a lot of companies operated a just-in-time supply chain and built long, very low cost, very efficient supply chains. And we know some of these were very impacted, from a black swan event like the pandemic. And then we kind of pivoted to like a just in case. So we flooded the supply chain with a lot of inventory, and we're seeing those excess inventory levels at the moment. So I think with rising inflation and in a high interest rate environment, that'll be a real challenge for a lot of organisations. So we'll see companies need to balance their supply chain operating model to meet the needs of their customers, but also to meet their own commercial objectives. And we like to think about this as 3 R's. So being responsive to your customers' needs, being resilient, having the right amount of inventory buffers and in the right area, and looking at your sourcing and supply arrangements, and also being responsible. So to being efficient, to reducing your costs, really looking at the consumptions of energy and materials, which really brings us to the last kind of trend that we're seeing is sustainability. And I think we'll see a greater focus on sustainability, both from customers and society expectations. And then I guess if you couple that with potentially higher input costs through inflations, we think you'll see the acceleration of the rise of sustainable supply chains around the globe. So, and we're seeing this today. Our customers are expecting us not only to comply with the sustainability laws, but to lead the way. And having these sustainable credentials is increasingly a key consideration, not only for our customers and suppliers, but also, for our staff. So Atoll, we're a leading global, Asia, Australia-based logistics company. We are heavily investing in sustainable supply chains. We've recently invested in the hydrogen fuel cell powered trucks in Australia through a partnership with Viva Energy, as well as engagement with industry and government. We've invested in electric trucks in Singapore, and we're exploring, lots of other opportunities for innovation around sustainable supply chains, not just here in Australia, but also around the globe. So they're the kind of the key trends that we're expecting to play out. I might just kind of pause there and see if there's any questions or if any other
look, that's fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. And also so many questions coming out of it. So look, let me just pick up a couple to get started. If we were to rewind 2 years, the terms that were on everyone's lips were onshoring, friendshoring, nearshoring, those sorts of things. What are you seeing in that space? Are those trends continuing, or have you seen some walk back on that? What's it look like?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it depends on what industry you are and where you are in terms of the economics of your industry. For example, there's still critical minimum, efficiencies of scale in semiconductors, which will really make it hard to unpack that, or certain degrees of expertise. But certainly in other sectors like retail, we're seeing a lot of that activity. And the example, the growth that we've seen already in the last 12 months, which is kind of just off the back of COVID, we are seeing our customers invest in capacity or switch capacity, into other regions. So, I think you definitely will see a lot. And it took 40 years to build, China up as the factory of the world. It'll take a long time, to unwind that. But I don't think it will ever unwind. China still has a massive role to play in terms of, the global economy and the global supply chains. But where it makes economic sense, especially, as we're moving towards having sustainability as a key investment criteria, you will see a lot more of, the nearshoring and localized supply chains. For example, in the US, you'll see a lot more cross-border activity between, North and South America, within Europe, and then within the Asia Pac, Asia. So I think it was BCG recently released a report, looked at the changing trade flows. Now, this has been happening for 10 years now, so it's not a new phenomenon. And I think COVID just actually helped to accelerate that a little bit. But I think Asia, is will become one of the biggest trading hubs, and I think that's where you'll see a lot of the activity. So it won't be so much localized. I think you'll see kind of 2 or 3 big kind of trading hubs, and of course there will still be global supply chains.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear you talk about technology, and we've written a little bit about this in our report on supply chain in Asia. One of the challenges around investing in new technology is, particularly for small and medium businesses and small and medium exporters, to really, balance operational demands and also then, having enough capital to invest in new supply chain technology. Do you have any views for small and medium businesses around how they can approach that?
Well, I think you can leverage off your partners, definitely. You don't have to do it all yourself. So you can, look to, some of your, providers to kind of leverage the technology who might have, bigger scale. But certainly the cost, what we've seen is the cost of the technology has come down a lot. So there are opportunities for small to medium-sized enterprise to invest in their technology. But you don't have to do it all yourself. You can kind of look to kind of industry models or kind of partnership models to bring that lower cost down.
Fabulous. Thank you, Matthew. Let me just check in with our other panelists to see whether they had any questions for you that might be sort of cross-cutting in terms of their own areas of interest. And if I don't hear from them shortly, I will move on. There's Bronwyn there. I haven't formally introduced you, Bronwyn. I might get you just to quickly introduce yourself, and please go ahead and ask a question of Matthew.
Hi, I'm Bronwyn C. I don't know about expert, but certainly I am an energy transition junkie. And coming from the oil and gas industry where I spent 20 years, I woke up one day and decided that the tsunami of sustainability was at my door, and I could drown or I could be part of the solution. So really glad to hear Matthew and Toll are being part of that sustainability solution. I think that's pervading Australian industry, but not as much as potentially what is pervading Asia. And so I wanted to ask Matthew, how do you see sustainable supply chains ramping up in Asia, and how they're looking that will impact their operations?
Well, I think I'll answer this in 2 parts. I think the first part is, as the availability of the technology comes down, I think, Asia's in a great place that they can kind of leapfrog some of the legacy issues and challenges that some of the more developed economies have in terms of, building sustainable supply chains. So I think that's a real advantage. And then there's the second element, is the getting access. So kind of, are the supply chains mature enough to access some of the, the raw materials that they need for renewable energies, for example. So there's really kind of 2 components, somewhat conflicting. But certainly, we are seeing that definitely in some of the more mature Asian markets, like I mentioned before in Singapore, a lot of our warehouses, are looking at kind of renewable energy, solar panels. We're investing in a fleet of electric trucks. So definitely they're there, and it's not just the more mature Asian economies, but we are starting to see that trend in all of the Asian economies.
And I couldn't agree with you more, Matthew. I think, we've all seen that potentially globalization is dead, but what I've also seen, and I'd like you to see whether you agree, is the notion of the green supply chain and how that's driving us in Australia to think a bit differently, in that consumers, particularly in Europe, are looking for green products, and that's driving them to understand that they want green throughout their supply chain, not merely at the last point of manufacture. And so logistics companies, shipping companies, they're all looking for green solutions, and that's pervading how we in Australia are looking at what is sustainability and how do we provide green products. Have you seen that come through too?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's not an easy problem we're trying to solve here. When you think about global supply, take air freight, for example, and just passenger travel, like we all, would still like to travel around the world. And we do need to use air freight as an efficient, supply chain, model to move goods around the world. But that's not an easy problem to solve from a sustainability perspective. But I think we're heading in the right direction. We're all setting targets. We're all starting to develop plans, and different companies might be at different levels of maturity in terms of their plan. And which is okay. But I think definitely the consumers are pushing it, which is a good thing, and I think it's the right thing to do anyway. But I think consumers were pushing it. And where it makes sense from a commercial perspective as well, I think when you get that alignment, I think that's where you'll see the rate of change really accelerate. So, but the shipping companies, for example, are investing significant money in renewable fuels, and that's not an easy problem to solve when you've looked at the weight of the vessels and the distances they travel. And so we are partnering with those companies and talking to our customers about offering, say, a green solution. So from end to end. So we're early days, but definitely we've got a bit of a vision and a plan, and we're working towards that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. And please do keep the questions coming in. I am keeping an eye on them. We will come back to the China ones a bit later. Just had another one come in about electric vehicles. We might come back to that one. But Bronwyn, stay with us. Because Bronwyn has a fantastic contribution in our discussion paper, sort of starting with electric three-wheelers in Asia, and then building from there to sort of take a broader look at renewables in Asia. And you have this fantastic turn of phrase where you say charging an EV in Asia is like a vegan eating a steak dinner. Bronwyn, I'd love for you to unpack a little bit some of the ideas that you captured in that prediction.
So when I started looking at EVs, it just seemed like it was just some sort of fairy tale, like batteries were at $1,300 a kilowatt hour, and it just seemed so far away. And then plus, in my youth, poisoning myself with tuk-tuk fumes seemed like a rite of passage. So the thought that, that wouldn't be something that we would have to deal with, the pollution, the noise, the lung capacity reduction, they were the things that just seemed too good to be true. And so the little article or the questions that I wanted to really look at was, why have we gotten past the tipping point on EVs without us really kind of realizing that we were past it? And certainly the consensus now is that we are careering towards EV adoption, particularly in Asia at a light speed that certainly caught me by surprise. And even though I see far too many Teslas when I pick up my children at their private school, we're not really seeing as much as we're seeing in Asia. And, you know, the numbers are staggering. The one I like to use is that China gave subsidies of $60 billion for EV adoption and to create infrastructure charging, but also to get consumers to buy them, to look at manufacturing of EVs. And what I think we're going to see really in Australia is the low cost EV coming through. And I think that's what we, or certainly my hip pocket wants to see, which is how do we get an EV into every home, because the benefits are not just, you know, pollution reduction, decarbonisation of transport, but EVs sit as a very important energy storage mechanism in that when the sun is shining, we have too much energy going into the electrical grid in Australia. And so EVs sit as a fantastic way of drawing that out and then releasing it back when the sun stops shining. And there's some of the benefits, I think, that Asia has also seen, that it's a multi-sectorial set of benefits. And what they have seen is that this ability for India and China to bring out low-cost EVs has really caused the adoption of EVs to skyrocket. And certainly that's super exciting. But the question, I suppose, is what and how can Australia be part of that? And while I was sort of mulling this through with Rob about 2 weeks ago, Ed Husick, our Minister, must have also been milling it through, because he released a policy statement on the 3rd of February, really around how is Australia going to grasp this opportunity of EVs and how are we going to move it forward. Because like many things in the green economy, we can either take them as a challenge, you know, a cost or a capex blowout, a need to invest in infrastructure where financing is difficult, or we can take the point of view that India, Thailand, Indonesia, and China have, is that this is a way to inspire manufacturing growth and to provide jobs and opportunities for the citizens. And so the question, I suppose, is for us, instead of sort of thinking about the difficulties of infrastructure, how could we turn this into something that Australia can do and then export into Asia? And the way that the minister is looking at it is really around batteries and Australia's position as a extractor of rare earths or critical minerals. And there's a great paragraph in the report that sort of outlines this by another contributor. And really, we have this great advantage because of our natural resources, but we very much don't bring them up in the manufacturing scale or the refining scale. And we send out our critical minerals at a very early stage and we're not part of that manufacturing chain that brings it back. And I think Australia and certainly DICE are really looking at, well, how far along that manufacturing chain could we be part of batteries to supply batteries to the world? And that's certainly a great step forward. And it's a great step forward for our engagement with Asia, because they're very interested in building EVs. They just need another supplier for the batteries. So get to it, Australia. I reckon we've got a great advantage there.
Fantastic, Bronwyn, and you make some really great points in there. And you know, I was listening recently to the Autonomous podcast, and they were talking about BYD, the Chinese EV maker, which I think is number 2 in the world, but is really production is growing exponentially in terms of the EVs that they're churning out. But I'm interested to come to this, I guess, question that you posed about where the opportunity for Australia comes in. And I'm interested to link it a little bit to the value chain around critical minerals and batteries, but also, you know, this question of renewable energy in Asia. And most energy still does come from fossil fuels, from thermal coal. Are there opportunities there for Australian businesses to support Asia as it goes through that energy transition?
Absolutely. And this is one of the key areas that Asia is really looking to Australia to provide. You know, we have had and have been at the bleeding cutting edge of renewable energy in the region. And certainly the expertise that we show really is valuable. And so for Australians, businesses, but also, you know, individuals wanting to create that change, it's very much a sought after set of capabilities and skills that Asia is seeking. We have some of the best fleets. We understand what solar and wind resource looks like. We're building capability in hydrogen and in offshore wind in a way that is quite fascinating, and certainly something that we should be considering sharing with our neighbours and partnering on. And I think that's where this industry is really going, is not so much the old oil and gas resource curse way, which is not consistent with Australian and international sustainability mandates, but certainly it is something that we can create a difference in. And what we've seen sort of rounds of applause for, and rightly so, is for the Australia-Singapore certainly new climate change agreements. And I might just put a little plug in for Asialink, in that Rachel Duggan, who negotiated that, is an ex-Asialink alumni, and they're fantastic people, if I do say myself, because I am one. But putting that aside, it is very much a great thing that Australia is seen to be on the edge, the cutting edge of this, and to be open to sharing its technology and its know-how. And that is opening doors in a way that we never thought it would. And it's a great way for us to start deploying that. Now, it is structural and policy issues that are there in the industries and in the countries, particularly in Southeast Asia. You know, they have to be rethought and reworked, and it's happening. It really is. And the impact of climate change, the fact that sort of 8 out of the 10 big cities that are going to be affected by climate change sit in Asia. You know, these are real changes. They can see that nature is changing, and the consumer pull for these types of arrangements is quite significant. So we will see a groundswell of real action on regulation to assist with renewable energy in Southeast Asia. And certainly the Australian government is really actively creating opportunities with their treaties and their agreements. As said, the first internationally between Australia and Asia on climate change treaty or agreements is ours. So is ours in Australia. So well done, and let's hope we see more of them.
Fantastic, Bronwyn. I do just want to go to a question that's come in, and I'm not sure whether it's best for Matthew to answer this one or you to answer this one. Just had a question come in from Anton asking about using EVs for freight forwarding in Australia, just considering the distance between depots and clients. Do you want to who wants to have a stab at that?
Well, hopefully Matthew will say something outrageous and I can tell him
go
it's wrong.
for it, Matthew.
Absolutely. If you look at freight forwarding, that tends to be kind of short haul distances. So from the port to a customer or to a logistics depot, or from an airport to an air freight facility, like the one I'm sitting here in Mascot. So it's only, you know, quite a short distance from the airport. Now that lends itself very well. So the point-to-point logistics, where you can have charging stations or enough capacity in your battery to do a day's worth of deliveries, and you can have some, you know, economic or renewable energy sources, you know, at your warehouse to recharge the vehicles. Absolutely. So it's a very good question. And I think where it's leading to is the longer distances. So absolutely, the longer distances. So long haul, interstate from Melbourne to Sydney or across the Nullarbor, that is a bigger problem to solve. But that's, you know, where other technologies come into play, and that's what we're looking at with our investment in hydrogen for, you know, and working with some of our bigger truck manufacturers. That you know, that's where electric vehicles don't apply, but different technologies like hydrogen do apply for those heavier, longer distances.
Fabulous. All right. We might move on. I'd love to bring in Tracy now. Tracy, you had a great contribution in the discussion paper, I think based on spending a bit of time in Vietnam. Would love for you to introduce yourself and then unpack some of the ideas that you had there, please.
Sure, thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Just to give some context, I'm not a migration expert, but the field I work in is investments. And as many of you know, offshore investment is very closely linked to migration, particularly from flows from Vietnam to Australia. I had a couple of clients from Vietnam looking to invest in Australia, and so I thought it would be a good opportunity to go back to Vietnam, but also visit family, business networks and friends to actually get a sense of what's happening over there. And what I, also some context, is I lived in Vietnam over 10 years ago and I worked in investments over there then. And the sense I got was there's been a shift in the sentiment towards migration. So when I lived there, what I found was there was a strong desire for people to migrate to Australia, to study, to work, and eventually find a pathway towards permanent migration. But now when I speak to people and also people in the migration industry, what I've found is that there's a consistent shift. Australia's always been and always will be a great place to live and study, but the consensus is that the opportunity for wealth creation and growth is in Vietnam. And, you know, anecdotally, I spoke to one of my good friends and contacts who is applying for a visa to Australia. I said, oh, great, so you're going to migrate your whole family. He said, oh, no. I said, well, what's the purpose? He goes, oh, well, I want to have that flexibility of, you know, traveling between Australia and Vietnam, especially when my kids are studying over there. But I don't want to live in Australia, maybe not until I retire, because this is where the opportunities are. You know, the investments I'm making are yielding double-digit growth. And I said, oh, okay. So that's just anecdotal. So I thought that's really, and when I was asked to come speak here, I quickly dug up some materials when I was investing in Vietnam back then. And this is what I would pitch. Why invest in Vietnam? Young population, high growth economy, high wage growth, resulting in an increase in the middle class and therefore increase in discretionary spending. Low but growing internet penetration and increasing banking penetration. And so I thought, let's unpack all those things and have a look at it again. So yes, still young population. 92% of the population is under the age of 65. The average GDP growth pre-COVID, over the last 10 years pre-COVID, was 6.5% versus Australia's 2.5%. Wage growth, 5% versus 2% in Australia. And so you can see all those thematics are still very much strong in Vietnam, and the country's very, don't get me wrong, COVID hit the country hard. And still very much focused on post-COVID recovery, reinvesting in infrastructure, tourism, trying to get people back in the country. But that said, they're still very much optimistic, particularly the youth of the country, very optimistic about technology adoption, about investment, about economic growth. So some fun facts here. Internet penetration when I was there was about 30%. And now it's very close to Australia. Oh, it's 75% or so, which means 130% growth in internet penetration. Another fun fact, smartphone adoption. It's almost on par with Australia, about 85%. What does it tell you? It tells you it's leapfrog from lagging in internet penetration through just almost on par with smartphone adoption. Banking penetration remains still quite low. It's only about 30% now. So therein lies the growth. The growth in what would happen if more of the country got access to finance. So those are the themes that I'm starting to see. There's a huge startup community. There's quite a lot of venture capital funds there as well. So I think they're kind of a bit of an anecdotal, but also a bit of research into, I guess, what I've just spoken about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tracy. And I think what I loved about it is it really does have implications for a few different sectors, right? But potentially also, the education sector as well. Thinking about Australians' education providers, and historically there has been some connection between studying in Australia and migration pathway. But if that preference or is shifting in some emerging economies, I think that's quite interesting. I think also quite interested in what you wrote as well from an emerging market perspective, particularly this year, where we may or may not see a global recession. So emerging markets are all the rage right now. But I guess there's also a lot of questions and hesitations around emerging markets. How do you access them? How do you get your capital in and get your capital out? I know you have worked across emerging markets in various roles. Where do you see the opportunity for Australians and Australian businesses?
So I think investing in emerging markets is still very much not a retail market. So it's not like you and I would just go and invest there. So to get access, you'd have to, as retail people, you would have to buy into like an ETF, exchange traded fund. Investing a fund. There are some listed funds that are listed in the London Stock Exchange or the AIM Exchange in the UK, or get exposure through your own super fund. So it's not very much a retail market. But for businesses and institutional investors, I think there is a strong market. When I was in funds management, and even more recently speaking to my fellow fund management colleagues over there, not many institutional investors in Australia there. Still mostly backed by European, US and UK institutional funds. There are hurdles to go through to invest, and you certainly need a partner or advisor on the ground to help with that. But there is growth and there's opportunity to do that. But nothing is without challenges.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tracy. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. So please do come in if you have any questions. Please put them in the Q&A. I'd love to go to you now, Leigh. And just there were a couple of questions that were coming through around China reopening. Leigh, would love to hear your views around that. Also because you recently wrote on that topic for our friends at the Lowy Institute in The Interpreter. So any views on what China's reopening might mean for Australian business, including professional services and finance, if you have any insights on that?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And actually a really sharp question to receive around services, because obviously a lot of the relationship with China when it comes to just sheer numbers is about commodity exports and how much they dominate the relationship. So the export of Australian commodities to China. And then, those barriers that were imposed that just blocked out specific categories of by and large products. But anyone who's involved in the sort of international trade game will talk to you about the evolution of free trade agreements and opening market access, and move from just reducing tariffs and as a straight out barrier to entry, then non-tariff barriers, so all of those rules and regulations. But it's the evolution of services components or services related conditions that help exporting services, if you like, get into new markets. And that's really, really true of China. I know the question asked about financial services in particular. So just a quick comment on China's banking system, which has, just like China's economy, grown really fast. And it's got all of those sort of painful elements of a sector that's grown really fast, but is, in this case with financial services, is really consequential. And if you get that sector wrong, then it can cause a lot of pain. I bring all of this back and reference the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP agreement, which is a multilateral FTA, which combines all of those ASEAN nations, but also China and Australia. And that's a really interesting agreement because it does provide preferential access for a lot of companies to a lot of sectors, but specifically, you could say it offers Australian service companies access to the China market ahead of other countries that are not included in RCEP. So specifically financial services and looking at the access and regulatory environment there, professional qualifications and, you know, the ability for professionals to practice in overseas markets, whether they're engineers or architects or whatever you might have it, is a really, really pronounced issue for a lot of them. So that's very, very welcome. Just the fact that, as I say, there was the a complete chapter or annex on professional services in RCEP. That was a first for almost 50% of the countries participating in this broad FTA RCEP. So it's quite consequential. Now, China's economy got its own challenges. So the opportunities there, you know, you have to navigate the risk and reward equation, that's for sure. That was a pretty technical answer, Rob, to that question. I hope it wasn't too dry. But you know, if I was a service provider who was looking at the Chinese market, I'd be more bullish because of RCEP than before it was put into place.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leigh. And I can't let you go without asking you also about India. Obviously, a lot of focus on India and hosting the G20 this year. I know you're going to India for some G20 events. You know, what do you think Australian businesses need to know about India in the year of the rabbit?
Yeah, really great market to call out in the trends report. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to focus on a lot of markets, but India certainly warrants some special attention. The opportunities in India as a large populous country that's becoming much, much more affluent, I describe them as relatively near term. So we often talk about being patient when it comes to Asia, building relationships, not saying they're not important, but a lot of Indian businesses are looking to engage, they're looking to do business. And there are some key sectors and there's some key investments by the Indian government around infrastructure in particular, energy transition. These are really fueling confidence in those sectors. There is a manufacturing boom in India, which we should be well aware of. So, you know, characterise a lot of the opportunities around that. For Asialink business, where you heard it first, I'll give a teaser. We're about to launch a program on boosting economic ties for Australian businesses looking at going to operate in India, to unpack those opportunities and to do it by sector, and also to a certain extent by market within India itself. It's a large country geographically, but it's a really exciting market. And I was there last year. I'm going there again this year at least once. But I was really encouraged by how much Indian businesses wanted to engage and wanted to do business. They wanted to move forward. And that's, as I say, really encouraging.
Thanks, Leigh. We've got a few minutes left. I'd love to just bring back all the panelists. And one of the questions that we asked in our discussion paper, when we asked people to give us the trends that they were watching, we also asked them to say, well, what should businesses do differently? Because if it's really a consequential trend, that implies that you've got to do something a bit differently. So I might go around the group and just see whether there's any final observations, but based on what you'd identified, what do you think Australian businesses should do differently? I might start with you, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, I think from a supply chain perspective, there's almost unlimited opportunities for Australian businesses. And I think the companies who can, respond and adapt quickly to, a bit of an uncertain environment. Potentially first mover advantage. There could be good, good growth in new markets and which I think is encouraging. I think what can they do? It's really about, using the data, and in this, in their business, and really understanding where those early signals could be, or what issues could be coming up that they can pivot away from. So I think using your data. I would encourage everyone to remain optimistic. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but just look how well we've navigated through the pandemic. I think we're going to be okay, Australia and Asia. So be confident about the opportunity. Have a strong view. You've got to look external. So first and foremost, think and act from a customer mindset, and really focus and understand that. But be agile. Challenge old ways of working. I wouldn't sit back and wait. Get on the front foot and look at those opportunities and be the first to move.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. Bronwyn.
So for energy transition and renewable energies, there's such a change and so much uncertainty. We've never really done energy transition like this before, moving away from fossil fuels. So that uncertainty is going to be there for quite some time, and therefore the risks are going to be quite unknown. There is a groundswell for policy to assist. And so take those risks, but also realise that partnerships also help. The on-the-ground partnerships with Asia and companies in Asia will help. And so start looking for those. It's really a momentum that's driving forward, and those partnerships are really coming to light in a way that can bring real opportunity for Australian businesses.
Fabulous. Thank you, Bronwyn. And Tracy.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Matthew and Bronwyn both said, and I think during challenging times, it's always feels safe to actually look insular and just stay close to home. But I would say be open-minded. It's actually a great time to explore how do we better connect and partner with our Asian neighbours, particularly on the labour front if we're facing a shortage, and in the tech sector, at least from what I've seen.
And Leigh, lastly with you, just to round us out, what will you be doing differently as a result of these things?
Thanks, Robert. Look, I'd just say we've heard some great conversation today, and particularly all of the trends that were laid out for us both in the report and the discussion today. Really, really useful and really, really practical things for business to be aware of. I think Bronwyn said it earlier about learning. I think you invoked learning, Bronwyn. There's knowing about the issue and the challenge, and Rob, we sometimes invoke that phrase of admiring the problem. Perhaps we're admiring the challenge and the opportunity. There is a time to prepare and a time to act. So I think we need to learn about these issues, acquire knowledge, and then act upon them. And that's the sequencing that you really need to invoke. It's an expensive time just to turn up in Asia. It's really competitive. So I really do think businesses should do their homework in 2023, learn a little bit about the market they're going to, the opportunities for the sector, and the opportunities, the size of the prize, I said right at the top in my opening remarks, is truly wondrous.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leigh. And I think that's a good reminder. Asialink Business is always here to help you and your business if you need assistance when it comes to Asia. So please do reach out. And that brings us to the end of our session today. I want to thank all our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us, for your contributions, for your insights. We do have some feedback that we'd love to get from the attendees. So I think we'll have a QR code coming up shortly, and you might be emailed something as well. We'd love to get your feedback because that'll help us shape these webinars and make sure we're covering the topics that are of relevance to you in the future. So please do take the time to do that, and we can make sure that we're really covering off those issues. Otherwise, that brings us to the end of today. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Asialink business event. Have a great day.